What's good, gamers? My name is Dr. Ryan Terrell, your psych sensei, and thank you for loading up this episode of QueueUP. But before we load in, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your mom so I can continue to bring you these awesome and insightful conversations. Please stop by my website, psychsensei.com, if you would like a mental blue buff to help you on your grind of improvement. And if you're serious about investing in your mental game, sign up for a free consultation where you and I can develop your win con and work towards it today. And remember, friends, stronger mental wins. In this episode of QueueUP, we're sitting down with the Esport physical therapist who always gets to the top 5% of any game he plays. That's right, we're sitting down with the powerful Dr. Matt Hu from 1HP. Alright, are you ready to queue up? Let's get it. What's good, gamers? What's good? My name is Dr. Ryan Terrell, Psych Sensei, and I'm hanging out in the queue with my good friend Dr. Hu of HP for Gamers. How's it going, Dr. Hu?
It's going really well. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. Dr. Hu, tell me a little bit about you, how you even got into gaming, where'd you start, where'd you come from, all of it, my friend.
Well, first off, everyone needs to know I'm a big gamer. I've been playing like competitive gaming since CS 1.3. For those that know, that was the bunny hop days, and I played competitively back then in Cali. And then when Overwatch came out, I played a lot of Overwatch, and then Fortnite. Typically, I just play a bunch of games, and I always try to get to the top 5%. I've been global. I've been Grandmaster. I made a little bit of money during the World Cup, and I was immortal in Valorant. So, I always get to the top. Outside of that, I'm also a physical therapist. I'm a board-certified orthopedic clinical specialist, so I specialize in injuries of the musculoskeletal system. I went through additional residency for that. I'm a strength and conditioning specialist. So I have another set of letters after my name. And all that is really to say that for the entire spectrum of physical health, from injury all the way to performance, I help gamers optimize that. In the past 6 years, I've been working in gaming and esports with professional players, as well as working with the community to help them better adopt habits and behaviors that will help them play more and hurt less, as well as live better so they can play better.
I like that. For many people, they think that the scope of esports professionals is so limited to either just coaches or whatever, but how did you find that intersection between what you love and what you do with your profession? Like, how did that happen?
My origin story is like Wolverine. No, it started in 2015, and back then they still have IM competitions. It was IM San Jose in 2015, and there was a league comp, there was a CSGO comp at the time. And so at the time, I was already writing a lot of content. And before I even got into writing some content for gamers, I had just graduated in 2014, and I knew I wanted to do something outside of the clinic. So I actually started trying to create this system to help CrossFit athletes prevent injuries. And I went out to all these boxes. I was like, we should be doing a pre-season or pre-training assessment to establish a baseline for how you guys move so you guys can prevent injuries. Realized they were my people. I would go home every day after work and I would be playing competitive CSGO. I was the IGL. Back then I would take screenshots of smokes and flashes and then walk my team through how to set it up. We would do dry runs. I would be doing that every single day after work and then watching competitive esports. And then I realized I can marry these two passions, helping people move better and also competitive gaming. And then from there, I just went crazy with writing a bunch of things and decided to go to this event and sort of just pitch every single person that I could talk to. And fortunately, someone was willing to listen to the message. I can help your organization be a little more mindful of the support of their players in terms of health. And that was CLG. I started right at the time when they really hit their peak. They went to MSI and really it kind of just snowballed from there. My working with some other organizations, Immortals, consulted for Evil Genius, Thieves, FaZe, Team Liquid, really like every major team out there. And now I'm working more with KSC Esports, always to establish this structure or long-term system that helps their players stay healthy and perform better.
Why I love hearing the origin stories or how people start. I had another guest on yesterday, Cavalier guest, where he just kind of said the same thing. It was like, I was really interested in something and I just kept going. And as one of the pioneers in the industry for PT or physical performance of gamers at the professional level, what was it like for you to break into the industry?
I mean, it definitely wasn't easy. I mean, I think the discourse back then was not the same as it is now, in that there's a lot more awareness. People have talked about it. I mean, there's still obviously reports of people getting injured, people thinking about retiring, people thinking that they need to get surgery. But back then, it was more so the Wild West than it is now. I still think it still has a long way to go with support of its players and general understanding of the community. But it required me to really work more against a lot of the beliefs that gamers had back then about how they approach their health, and required a lot more nuance and approach when talking to managers, talking to coaches. Not that I don't have to now, but at least it's within the collective consciousness of everyone in the industry that you might need some support. Whereas before it's like, oh, I guess I need some support, and how much is it going to cost? And to be completely frank, back then I did it for free to get in the industry. I was working on a clinic on the side, and then I would just go to CLG for free to help support them. And from there, really built up and demonstrated the value of having someone there for them to realize, okay, well, this is something we need to put more value into because it helps the players.
Not easy. You put in the sweat equity. It sounded like you also had a passion and you just found ways to make it happen or advocate the need for your specialty, especially with players. And I'm wondering, like, in your career, what's the age range of the types of athletes that you work with?
I think it depends on the title of the game itself. CSGO, Call of Duty might skew a little older.
When we say older, we're talking like 25.
Like 24, 25, yeah. Young, and then Fortnite really skewing younger towards like 14 to 17. Definitely a lot younger. It depends on the game title itself as sort of the main thing that I think affects the average age group. But I would say it's always within that range from 16 to 25, average age of like 18 to 19 for the people that I work with. Definitely 90% of the time, they have not been in any sort of system where they've worked with a coach or worked with support staff before, because most of them weren't athletes in high school or middle school or did intramurals or did basketball, because a lot of the times gamers themselves with their personality, they shy away from that formalized structure to go play games. It's important for us as any type of support staff to understand that, so that we're not trying to force them or bring this framework from traditional sports to say like, you have to do it like this. There is a unique population that we have to bridge the gap so that we know where they're coming from, and then gradually move them towards what we know to be ideal based on evidence or research.
Interesting. So there's a difference between like traditional sport athletes and esport athletes. Because of the coaching, they're more used to people saying, okay, this is the system we're doing, do it this way. Versus esports, it's kind of making them understand and allowing them to make that choice to do the exercises and structure and such.
Exactly. Just think about it. There's this developmental pipeline in all traditional sports, from baseball, basketball, volleyball, football. In middle school or elementary school, you can join a intramural league, or you can join little league, and they have to work with coaches, teammates. They have to do some training. They're introduced to those concepts early on. And they're coming straight from high school, and then they don't even know how to take care of themselves. They're being brought over from different countries. They don't know how to do laundry, how to cook for themselves. A lot of the times organizations will just expect them to handle all of that and also be a pro player. Basically handle the development of being a high school, college, and pro athlete all in the span of a couple months, and say, all right, well, if you don't succeed, then sorry, we'll just bring in another player. They should be a little more mindful of that and support them with an appropriate pipeline. Well, we know you're coming from this place where you don't know even how to take care of yourself. Like, let's start there, and let's not put that much pressure on you.
Man, I think you've just touched on so many things, not just the structure of like an AYSO, Pee-wee football, or Little League something where people get groomed and trained in a specific structure of how to get ready, prepare, and play a sport, but also you're touching upon like all the social cultural things that players come into when they just become a pro. What are some misconceptions that you run into all the time when working with esport athletes? Fixed mindsets or things that are just incorrect?
Oh, man. Well, I feel like there's quite a few. I think number one is something that I say a lot through a lot of my content about carpal tunnel syndrome, and how 99% of the time it's not carpal tunnel syndrome. And in fact, it is a tendon related issue that's leading to the pain in the wrist and hand. And most of the reason why people think that it is because one, they look at Dr. Google and they say wrist pain, space, gaming, and the first like 5 to 6 articles that they see are relating to carpal tunnel syndrome. So they self-diagnose. And then number two, unfortunately, there are healthcare providers out there that, just being completely honest, that are just a little older. They're not up to date with the current evidence, and they might just diagnose a gamer because they only have less than 10 minutes to talk to them in the office as you have carpal tunnel syndrome, and just rest, just wear a brace and it'll get better. And that just makes it worse because tendon issues do very poorly with rest. You get weaker, your muscle tendon complex gets weaker, signaling from the brain to the muscle gets weaker. Just all bad things happen when you rest. Those are probably the most common reasons why people think that it is. And my content, the reason why I try to push that so often is so that we can sort of change the overall belief and understanding of that. It's tendon related pain. And the way that we approach tendon pain is very different than how we would approach carpal tunnel syndrome. Rest or unloading a nerve that's irritated or being compressed is very different than unloading a tendon. It's bad. You always need a loaded tendon. That's probably one of the largest ones. Some of the other ones might be like, oh, exercise will get me tired, so I don't want to exercise. Or posture is a really big one. Like, oh, there is such a thing as bad posture. Basically, what I can say now is that, and what we know with the research is that there's no such thing as bad posture, meaning there's no one posture that's inherently more harmful than any other position. Forward head or nerd neck is not inherently more harmful, because our bodies are resilient. But the thing that's more important is the amount of time that we spend in that posture. That's the thing that leads to adaptive changes. And that's the thing that leads to issues in the long run. And if you have overall physical inactivity, if you don't move a lot and you have this posture where you are in a forehead position for a long period of time, that will lead to issues. But if you just are like this for a couple minutes and then this for a couple minutes, you're not going to deal with pain. I always say your best posture is your next posture.
Flip it. Yeah. That's kind of like if you were just standing like this, making a T position and just trying to hold this for X amount of time. Sure, you can do it for a little bit, but soon enough, like right now, my arm's going to get wiggly. It's going to get harder. So moving to the next position is probably better than just keeping something static. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, right. Like any 24-hour stream where you're just sitting there is not going to be helpful, no matter what. You can sit with perfect posture for 24 hours straight, and the guy that takes a 5-minute break every hour will be exponentially better than the guy that sits there.
Wow, not just physically, but also mentally for sure. That little break, just to think about something else, just providing your little respite between each position mentally or physically. Interesting. Something else that you really made me think about was when people go to their primary care physician and say like, what's wrong with me? Oh, you have carpal tunnel. Like, how often do you think either players or people get misdiagnosed by their primary care physician? Not saying that they're bad, but just because they don't need enough time or training to really understand the issue.
I mean, I think it is a function of the healthcare system. I don't want to say like how often that happens. Again, it's hard to really say. There have been physicians that refer out to therapy that say, hey, this is not within my scope. Go see a physical therapist for wrist pain. But the majority of the time when people get to us, they have been through a few physicians that have said just rest. They've even been to a few physical therapists that may not understand how to properly load gaming injuries. They don't know the game title specifically, or they don't know how to gradually increase the load of the athlete. And when I say load, I just mean like the amount of stress that's placed on the wrist so that we don't push it into tissue irritation, or we don't push it into repetitive strain. The big picture approach is graded exposure, or gradually increasing more and more over time. So as you're strengthening some of the muscles here or whatever, you're able to handle more gameplay, but you never want to push over the amount that your actual wrist and hand or muscles and tendons in the wrist and hand tolerate. If 5 years ago you asked me, I would say probably a majority of them, just based on the healthcare system, but with more and more awareness around physical therapy and movement science and just better overall practitioners pushing for the right things, I'd say it's probably improved a little bit, 20 to 40% better. Like now 60% is being like potentially misdiagnosed, or at least not properly educated about what they need to do as a next step. They're just told to rest. That still happens all the time.
How do typically people come to a physical therapist? Are they able to just go to a physical therapy clinic, or they have to get some type of script from their PCP? Like, how do people find physical therapists?
So now what's great with physical therapy is that we have direct access. So you can see us for a certain period of time before you are requiring a script. You can head straight to a physical therapy clinic or office and say, hey, I have wrist pain. And typically the physical therapy evaluations are 30 minutes to an hour, which is 4 to 5 times longer than what you get at a physician's office. And it's the appropriate type of injury and system of the body. So I really feel that physical therapists are in the best position to provide injury support to gamers. After that 30-day period, I forget the direct access period, I think it might be 45-day period, then you have to get a script from a physician to be able to continue to treat them.
Got it. Say I'm a amateur player or a esport athlete trying to improve and grind and climb. I get injured. I listen to the show. Now I need to go maybe to a physical therapist first. What should a player say more specifically to key into what is happening so they get specific help instead of, oh, carpal tunnel?
I mean, it's not the responsibility of the gamer to make sure that the physical therapist has evidence-based approach. That's never their responsibility. Ultimately, if they say, hey, well, like, I'm a gamer and I deal with this pain, it bothers me after a session of 4 to 5 hours, immediately a better therapist might think of the current evidence, might think of the current research, and do an appropriate assessment to rule in or rule out whether it is truly a nerve-related issue or a tendon or muscle or ligament, whatever related issue. It should never be the responsibility of the gamer. But I would be wary of a physical therapist that says, hey, you probably have carpal tunnel syndrome. Ask why. Why do you think so? You deserve the explanation from the physical therapist to give you a better understanding as to why you're dealing with what you're dealing with. A good physical therapist, by the end of your session, you should know exactly what's going on. You should know exactly what the contributing factors are. You should know how long it's going to take for you to get back to a certain level of function, because we know timelines based on tissue adaptations. Also helping you understand realistic expectations with changes in habits and behavior and lifestyle, and saying the more that you stick with some of our recommendations, the faster progress you'll make. If you're not getting any of those, go get a second opinion. If you don't leave knowing what's going on, and this happens so many times, I asked, hey, what did that physical therapist talk to you about? I don't really remember. I just had to do a couple exercises. It's like, okay, well, maybe the wrong things were emphasized. And what I do at the very end of my visits is I almost quiz them. In the very beginning, I'm going to ask you at the very end what you understood from our conversation, and really just kind of test them. Like, so what do you understand is going on now? If your mom, if your brother, if your friend asks you, hey, what's happening? You should be able to describe it. If not, then I failed.
I can only imagine how many times this has either happened to you or you've seen this, because just telling about how fired up you get about this makes me seem that you've experienced this a lot.
All the time.
All the time. Do you think it's just not knowing the differences in injury, or just not doing a good assessment? Like, what do you think that's from?
I think the standard of practice is just not there yet in physical therapy. I went through a residency program. They drilled that into me. You go to any other physical therapy office, there's some people that don't care as much about their job. They just do it for a paycheck. There needs to be an elevated standard of practice that physical therapists need to be held to. And not only PTs, every other profession, right? There's always good and bad of every other profession. That's what we should strive to achieve by the end of every session, that they should know certain things. And if you don't provide that, then I'm sorry, maybe this isn't a profession for you. You need to care enough about your patients to educate them well. It might be unfair for me to say that because, hey, sometimes there are clinics where you're working there and you work at a mill. There's clinics where you have to treat so many patients in an hour, 4 patients in an hour, you only get 15 minutes per, or just based on the environment of the clinic, you might not be able to have as much time. Then absolutely, I mean, it's hard. That just requires the profession of physical therapy to move forward.
So it sounds like there's a couple different things. One, what I really liked is that you emphasize the self-advocation of you as a player, or if you're a parent, have a player, to really make sure that you come away from that PT experience with those things that you said. Like, do you have a plan? Is there a timeline? Is there a goal? How do I know when I'm fixed or it's better? And also at the same time, PTs, having the time to examine their patient, knowing exactly what's kind of going on and knowing exactly how to treat gamers. It seems like there's a lot of things going on. I think I'm vibing with you too, because I think as a psychologist, psychologists, that's something that we have to deal with, where they'll either go to their PCP and they'll just go get drugs, a stimulant or antidepressants, and they don't really understand the whole picture of what's kind of going on, instead of coming to either a psychologist or psychiatrist to get a team of doctors to kind of help you with those things. I'm vibing with that. Have you noticed different injuries for different age groups or different titles?
Definitely. Depending on the title, it might lead or lend itself to different physical demand. A PC game, FPS game versus like a MOBA, those can lead to similar injuries. But outside of that, there's also what input device peripheral are you using? What's your grip that you're utilizing? And how are you using your keyboard? What's your sensitivity? There's all these factors that we have to consider that lead to different muscles and tendons being used. One of the more common injuries that we see is tendon-related pain on the pinky side of the wrist. Most common injuries we saw last year, it was pain over here relating to tendons of the muscles that lift our fingers up. So they're repeatedly lifting their fingers off of the mouse, and that leads to tendon-related issues here. And I would say in general for all of these problems, we have tendon problem here, tendon problem here, tendon problem here, and I always talk about 1HP's big three for injury management. That is one, your posture and your ergonomics. How you are set up in front of your computer, how you're holding your mouse influences the amount of physical stress on certain muscles. If the mouse is too tall or if your wrist is bent up too much, then you might overutilize some of those muscles. If your hand is too big relative to the mouse, you might be overutilizing that. If your wrist is tilted a certain way, you might be overutilizing certain muscles. The second one is your overall conditioning. If we talk specifically about the wrist, it means how much muscular endurance do you have to handle the repeated stress of the game that you're playing. If you're playing a game like Fortnite or OSU or Kovacs or AimLab, pretty high APMs, there's no doubt about that. And you are repeatedly doing right flicks. That might lead to you overusing those sided muscle. You need to have the endurance to handle that. The analogy I give is you have to have enough health to handle the amount of actions over the duration of how long you're playing. And that leads to the last part, which is your actual schedule or your habits and lifestyle. If you play 10 hours in a row without taking breaks, of course, there's no opportunity for your muscles to relax. There's no opportunity for your muscles to recover a bit between some of these higher intensity sessions. Basketball players, football players, soccer players don't play 50 hours straight of high intensity versions of their sport. Right? They're not running up and down the field 5 hours at a time. But for gaming, even though it's perceived as sometimes being lower intensity, which yes, absolutely it is relative to the type of movements that people are doing on the field or on the pitch, it's still, for the smaller muscles of our wrist and hand, relatively high enough load that can lead to issues. And hey, injuries occur, we know that. So how you manage your lifestyle and the breaks that you take, stretching maybe between your games or getting regular exercise can influence your ability to handle a lot more than others. So it's those big three: posture, ergonomics, conditioning, and your lifestyle, habits, and behavior.
I was trying to think of another shun for you, but when I was thinking about those big three, I got position, condition. I was like, oh, we need another shun, but it's schedule. I was like, damn it, there's another like catchy shun in there. Really interesting when you talk about like high intensity. When they like classically think of high intensity, how do they define that?
In what regard?
Because when I'm thinking about like soccer players, when we're in traditional sports, when they do high intensity thing, explosive jumps, sprints, and things like that, we think high intensity. But at the same time, when I was listening to you speak, what I'm thinking about high intensity is even though they're using fine motor muscles, the intensity in which they're using them still seems very high.
Yeah, maybe in traditional sports, your higher intensity with respect to cardiorespiratory stress and physical stress, whereas the stress for gamers might be just more musculoskeletal intensity of the velocity of the movement you're performing repeatedly. That can be higher intensity because we're not necessarily stressing our cardiorespiratory system as much. Not to say that it doesn't. There's research that shows
for sure
during chess games, their heart rate gets up to 150 beats per minute, or pretty high heart rate that can lead to pretty high calorie burn. And there's some early studies that show the same thing for Fortnite players, right? But that's all in response to stress or sympathetic nervous system activation. High intensity for gaming is probably a combination of just the musculoskeletal load of the more dynamic and higher velocity movements, and then context specific stress of how they perceive certain situations that might lead to more sensitivity of the risk. One thing that I maybe haven't mentioned is that there are also cultural beliefs that we also have to work with to be able to better assist or support the player. The difference is maybe someone from Europe versus someone from the US versus someone from Korea or Asia might not value external support the same amount because of the culture of how it's utilized or how they normally perceive its benefit in their respective country. From my experience, I've had to take more time to demonstrate the value of this external support for Korean and Chinese athletes being imported to some of the respective teams that we work with, because of their culture and the cultural beliefs. They really believe authority. They really ascribe to what the authority says about certain things. And so in Korea or in China, a lot of the times physical therapy is pretty behind in those areas of the world. And so a lot of the times they are just prescribed rest, prescribed bracing. And so it's even harder to work with those athletes from those cultures because we have to help them understand, okay, well, this is the musculoskeletal system. This is what happens to our system if it gets weaker and if it can get stronger. Pain just doesn't occur for no reason. A lot of the times it's like, okay, well, I need surgery because my doctor said so. Well, no, you don't. And we have to talk to them about imaging, why imaging might not provide them with a clear enough understanding of the actual cause of the pain versus, I would say, like working with Korean imports and Chinese imports is probably a lot harder than NA and European cultures from my experience.
Wow, I didn't even think about that aspect. That makes total sense. And I guess another cultural aspect, I'm guessing more East Asian cultures probably present a lot of either cognitive or mental challenges or things that are stresses that they're having more somatically also. So there's an added thing in there. It's like, oh, is this actual PT thing, or is there more kind of a mental stress that's manifesting themselves in their hand being cold or stressed or tense or what have you? Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, the way they perceive certain situations is completely different. Like when they deal with pain, it's not the same way certain other cultures might deal with pain. Or how they perceive doctors might not be the same as how we perceive doctors. There's all these different things to consider that we have to work with and understand to be able to best serve that specific population. But I have noticed that the imports that have spent more time here, they're definitely open to it because they've adapted to the culture. They've acclimated to the North American belief system and or the European belief system and understand its importance for overall health and support.
Man, that must be a trip when they have to go back to their home country and be like, no, guys, trust me, this works. Like, no, we don't do that here. Like, oh no, that's not what I learned.
But then again, most of the time, they're not going to fight against the culture. They'd rather go with a path of least resistance and just buy back into their old culture.
So if, Dr. Who, if you were going to create a structure, for example, like everyone does this is the best way to prepare your body to do your esport for X amount of time, your training session, whatever you would create, the person be like, yes, Dr. Who, that sounds good. I'm going to do it. I'm going to follow to a T. What would you put in there? How would you structure that for them?
First off, it wouldn't be the same for everyone. So like my first question would be
great answer.
Understanding what they're doing currently. We do this always with teams, but we have to develop this profile of who they are, what they believe in, what they do on a regular basis, how much they're sleeping, what are they eating, are they exercising, do they have history of exercise, all this stuff. Synthesize that information to make the best next step for them that we know that is reasonable for them. If someone that has exercised before, we can probably go a little more aggressive in how we approach it and if they found benefit for it. Or if they said, okay, well, I did exercise and it didn't really help me, I'm going to approach those guys completely differently. In that, okay, well, I need to kind of show him that there are benefits and I have to show him in a certain way. And there's an art to being able to identify what avenue or what modality can give them the benefit that they need for a certain behavior or habit that I want them to adopt. There is no one best program for anyone, but I would say we have to assess the physical stress based on how they set up around their environment, based on the esport, based on esports schedule, based on their input device, everything individualized to them and then work up from there. I think there's absolutely systems that we can put in place, just like the systems that we have at the organizations we work for. You do a preseason assessment, you do a mid-season assessment, postseason assessment, regular meetings with the players to ensure that they are staying compliant, but also to gradually help them adopt the right beliefs. And you're changing that over time, exposing them to maybe some of the thought patterns that they didn't think about, and then maybe highlighting, oh, this is why it might be beneficial based on how you felt after you tried XYZ. But it takes time. And that also takes bravery from the organization themselves to buy into it. And it's also hard because in the current landscape, maybe they don't want to spend on that. They want to spend on talent. They want to spend on winning. And that's where we have to balance our expectations and help them realize, well, if we help your athletes stay healthy, then maybe you won't lose money from them not playing. We can flag that early on. Those type of issues won't even develop in the first place because we'll have caught them very early because we have weekly meetings and discussions with them, and then they're addressed. It never progresses to a point where it will make them not be able to play. Hey, if any organization's watching this, if you've had someone that has had to take time off, you've already failed. You don't have the right system. So if you want to, hey, we can help with that.
I think that's beautiful. What I took away from that is a structure for everyone, but that structure is going to look different for everyone because everyone has different needs, everyone has different issues and challenges, strengths. Just having that system though in place, personalized to that player, is critical. I think something else that you're touched upon too is the whole notion of, sure, this player is good and great, but how long do you want them to be here? How long do you want your team to win for? Sure, you can win for the season, but do you want to create a dynasty or a legacy? And to do so, you're going to need to put some work and some investment into players and player health. What do you think the misconceptions are of organizations or even players of what a physical therapist is and what they can do? For example, if I was in high school, we had a physical therapist or a trainer and would go and get taped and get massaged or whatever, and that's what physical therapy was. I'm thinking that's what most people think, but what do you think the misconceptions of what a physical therapist is and can do in the esport world?
That is definitely a big barrier for our profession, and that people think, oh, we just massage, we just do electrical stimulation, ultrasound, all these things that have less and less evidence for support because it's just addressing the source of the pain, not the actual cause. We're movement experts, that we help people move better so they can do, what they love, which in this case is gaming, without any functional issues, without any pain, without any limitations. So the misconception is that they're just here to help with things as they come up. No, we can help with prevention. And this has to change also outside of just esports in itself. And this is why I want to be proactive and promote our profession well in this space. I also believe mental health specialists should also be like this. We should be lifelong practitioners that everyone sees on a regular basis to get a tune-up for how you move, because how you move is everything. You want to always be able to walk. You want to always be able to do things well. You want to do what you love and not have any increased risk of pain. But we don't put enough value on that. And the second part of it is for mental health, especially in the society now with social media, with all this external validation that we always seek through all these channels. I think it's so crucial just to have every year just a tune-up to see, well, what are my blind spots? What are my biases? What are the things that I need to know about myself so that I can make better decisions and I'm not just blindly moving forward, listening to some influencer tell me that I just need to breathe. Which, hey, I'm not saying that breathing strategies are not helpful. They absolutely are. But within this context of maybe an overall better approach and better perspective of how you manage maybe your mental health or manage your thought process associated with certain things or how you perceive stress. I think the misconception is that we really need to, at least for physical therapists, realize we can help more with both prevention and active management of issues. And we can create better systems for organizations around that.
Just extending that thought more, because I'm thinking like as an organization, when would I want to start addressing these problems? Oh, only when they become problems for my players. Then I want to put it out. Oh, they can't play. I need to bench someone. I need a roster swap. They're actively can't flick because their wrist is sore. Okay, now I need a physical therapist. And then when I think about people too, that's kind of how it works. Like, oh, I'm not going to go to the doctor unless I'm sick. I'm not going to go to the hospital unless something's seriously wrong. Or I'm not going to go to a therapist. That's where only like crazy people go. Versus like, oh no, we work in prevention. We do work in crisis management and how to fix challenges and issues, but we more so have this preventative medicine piece that people don't utilize or understand, which I think is such an interesting conversation to have with other professionals. How often when you give these preventative talks about stretching or whatever, people are like, oh yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the times people just, because they've heard it so much, it devalues it. But also the way that it's approached sometimes in those conversations is it's focused on the short term. It's like, oh, you just do these stretches. But they don't highlight the overall framework of, okay, well, this is how the body works, and this is why it's necessary for us to do stretches occasionally, but we also want to focus on conditioning. There's all these key concepts that need to be provided. The context needs to be provided so that the org as well as the team understands why it's beneficial.
I really like that metaphor of your endurance essentially is like a health bar. And every time you use it, your HP goes down. There's no in-games, there's no healer to go back and heal your arm. Every time you use it, you flick it, like it goes down. I never really thought of it in that same sense of mental and cognitive endurance where you still have that, maybe if it's a monobar in that sense where it goes down every time you use it. Every game a chunk gets removed and you gotta take breaks and rest to actually let that thing go back up. And to add things into your monobar or your health bar, you can stretch, you can practice these conditioning exercises so you can continue to perform at a high level. Oh, that's such an interesting way to introduce it to your players. I'm guessing that really hits them when you kind of use these types of in-game metaphors.
We did exactly that. Our physical health is our HP, and what we call the mental health component is the mana. If you educate them to perceive stress better, instead of losing 4 MP, you lose 1. It's the same thing. If you teach them how to have better posture, they don't lose 4 HP, you lose 1. If you teach them to stretch regularly, guess what? You're taking a potion, you restore some of your HP. You take a mental break from gaming, you restore your MP. It works. But the biggest thing of all is, how do I increase the size of my health bar and mana bar? You educate yourself about, I need to learn about stress. I need to learn about emotional management. I need to learn about everything that Ryan talks about. Or for me, I need to learn about posture, ergonomics, stretching, exercise, conditioning, all of those things. And putting it within that context, I always get the wow, that aha moment. Okay, that makes sense. And that allows them to buy into it. And so if you ever hear the health bar, mana bar, that's the 1 HP special. Right?
That's a TM right there.
We're going to create a study about that.
Yeah, that's really
cool.
It
is a 1 HP special.
I love it. And another thing I would kind of add on to what you're saying is if you're hearing these things and kind of like you're saying, oh, when we tell people to stretch or take breaks or whatever, I think the one thing we want to emphasize is if you've heard it and you know it, that's great. But the next question is, how often do you practice it? How consistent are you in actually implementing these stretches, implementing these thought experiments, implementing these things to actually improve your game versus, oh, I know it already. I already gained those +4. But really, it's always putting it into practice. And I think that's the problem for people. Just think it's training. I'm going to go to this thing. I'm going to go practice. I'm just going to do this. Where it's like, no. You actually need to take a step back and learn through whatever practice it is in sports, the physicalness, or even the outside cognitive piece and learning it. I think that's the biggest trade-off, especially in esports, is the learning versus the doing. How oftentimes do people invest in their learning about their body and what they should be doing to improve their performance? Or is it only until they come to you?
Ultimately, it depends. It depends on everything about their environment growing up. Were they exposed to that? Same thing. The esports infrastructure doesn't support the young and upcoming player who's wanting to get better at a game to think about that. And that's why 1HP is actively trying to change that, right? Making sure that there is a system early on. We are working in high schools, or we want to collaborate more with both high schools and collegiate scenes to have this infrastructure so that they are thinking about those things earlier on. I think that's probably the most important about it. They need to learn about it earlier on in order to be more open to discussing it. Otherwise, you just have to work against some of the beliefs that they might have or help them understand from the get-go why it's important.
What I love about talking to professionals or people who've been in the scene who are the top of the game, they're top coaches, groundbreaking people like you and yourself with your team, it's like this intentionality piece of I'm intentionally investing my time into this thing so I can get better at whatever I want to do. I'm intentionally investing in my body and these stretches and these pieces of knowledge so I can continue to play at a high level. Not just I'm investing in this because it's sore ow, but I really want to invest in my body or what I'm thinking so I can continue for a long time to perform at a high level. I think that people forget about the intentionality piece of just why are they doing things instead of just doing them. Can you tell us a little bit about 1HP and what you guys are doing and what you guys have coming up in the pipeline? All of it, man.
Sure. So 1HP, for anyone that doesn't know, we're this resource or home base for healthy gamers to help learn habits, behaviors, beliefs, and approaches through simple tips to make sure you can live well and game well. We work on multiple fronts. We focus a lot on education, right? Through a lot of our content, through things like this, through our TikTok, our YouTube, Twitter. We work with high school, collegiate, and professional teams and athletes to make sure that they develop those same habits so that it can trickle down to the rest of the community. So we work at the community level to trickle up so that the pros have to adopt the same habits. Pros trickle down. So we have trickle up, trickle down effect. I don't want to give too much away of what we're doing, but there's a lot of big things that are in the works, not only for the future healthcare providers in the space, but also just our involvement with several teams, as well as our involvement on a bigger scale for certain things. I'll just leave it at that. There are definitely some big things coming up for 1HP.
I know this might be a leading question, but now that you work at the high school, collegiate, and professional levels, is there a specific level that you like working with the best?
I feel like working at the high school level is so much easier because there's not all these added beliefs and things that we have to work against. It's like if you have an onion, you don't have to peel back as many layers. We're already down to the core. You can add these healthy layers of beliefs over instead of having to peel back and then add the healthy layers. I don't know if that's the right metaphor or analogy, but
that is definitely Shrek approved.
Yeah. Working with the younger populations is easier because this is like their first foray into the esports experience, and then they're getting some discussions about health and wellness right at that point. That helps their entire growth as a professional or competitive esports player because they will always be considerate of that. There'll be less overall issues for that collegiate or high school athlete.
It's so funny because I'm trying to relate this back to my work, and sometimes, man, working in the high school is the hardest because I have to go back to their parents, which are probably the source of like all the badness of the family system. But it makes sense in the esport arena where if you instill these good habits and educate young athletes about what could help them and why it's going to benefit them for the future, and they're able to take on these habits, why it will persist later on versus having either collegiate or professional athletes who've been doing this since what they were 14, 11 with no help and only brother and sister internet to help them and having to undo all those bad habits or beliefs before putting in your other ones. That must be very, very challenging.
Yeah, exactly. It's not easy.
No, it's not. I think it's so interesting too, from our previous conversation, as your work as a physical therapist, how much psychology you actually used to help people eat the things that you have given them to eat.
Yeah, exactly. Part of the residency program that I went through heavily focused on cognitive behavioral therapy because we had to help them cognitively restructure and think differently about certain ideas, certain beliefs. We have to change that. If we don't change that, we'll never get them better. They believe so firmly that this MRI, this herniated disc, is the cause of their pain, and their terminalistic belief limits them from doing anything. They're like, oh, I have the herniated disc, so I can't walk, I can't bend, I'm weak, my body's broken. No, we have to undo all of that, untangle that belief. That's work. That takes time. It's fun.
Have you found that when you either provide a diagnosis or review a diagnosis, does that make people comforted that they have a name for it, or they become the diagnosis? Like, oh my gosh, I have carpal tunnel and it's over. Or like, oh, I have carpal tunnel, I know how to treat it. Like, what have you noticed when people perceive that news of what they have?
The main thing we always say, you are not your diagnosis. You are not carpal tunnel syndrome. That is just representative of some of the source or potential causes of the pain. Your body is resilient You're capable of addressing those, and here's how. And so a lot of the times it is when they do seek support of myself or any of the other therapists at 1HP, it's like, oh wow, I was told I can't do this, and that really made me feel better. They were educated well about their injury, and they realized that they can get back to function. Oh, I don't just do exercises and I just expect to get better. No, you have to pay attention to your schedule. You can't just do exercises and then play 10 hours a day and say, it's not getting better, this guy's not helping me. You have to consider all of the contributing factors, help you realize which pieces of the pie contribute to it.
I love it. I love how you've addressed that PTs aren't just there to fix problems or to help you stretch, but it's more of a holistic lifestyle change to help you prolong your increased performance instead of just getting you back to baseline. Like, it's much bigger and much more integrated into a whole person. I think that's really, really cool. And I really want to emphasize that. Dude, Dr. Hu, thank you so much for your time. I'm just realizing now that we just spent like an hour vibing, and I'm wondering, is there anything you want to shout out? Is there any last bits you want to talk about? The floor is yours, Dr. Hu.
Not really. I feel like we covered a lot of really big key points. I would just ask that everyone maybe take a step back and think a little more about how you're approaching your own lifestyle at the moment. Is there any one thing that you can try differently this week that we talked about, that Ryan talks about all the time, or that someone you follow has talked about that you feel like could be beneficial? Break that down into a really small step and see if you can incorporate it in that way to gradually change your habits. You always want to be getting better, and if you're not thinking differently, doing things differently every day, then you're not improving. And I would say you need to, because that's what life is about.
Woo! Powerful, Dr. Hu. What a powerful message. I think another thing I just add to that is be brave. Sometimes that can be scary, but to really look inside of yourself and challenge yourself to find that one thing and do that internal exploration and evaluation. Be brave, my friends. Thank you, Dr. Hu, for joining us in the queue, and we'll see you guys later. All right, friends, you guys take it easy. All right, what we got on the agenda today? Oh, you're still here. That's weird. Video is over. But you're probably not really here. You're probably just scrolling. So if you want to put some more information in that noggin, why don't you catch this other episode of QueueUP right here? And hey, if you want some other stuff, I got some more content right here. But hey, if you really want that extra credit, I got my website right here, psychsensei.com. But you're probably just going to let this video scroll, and that's cool for me because, let's be real, I need the views. So again, got this one, got this one, got this one. And so I will see you later. Take it easy. Pieces. Bye.